us. I think it was a very interesting and energizing conversation that we had towards the end of 2020, and we're going to look to pick up again. And we've actually added to the team, so I'm just going to take a second and introduce those who are participating today. And our newest panelist, Mary Barrell, VP Media Affairs at Charity Village and the president of Talent Inc. So welcome, Mary, and glad you could join us. And our returning panelists, Paul Nazareth, Vice President Education Development at the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, Paul Spivak, President and CEO of Volunteer Canada, and Sandra Swallam, Executive Director of the Boys and Girls Clubs, or I should probably say BGC of Canada Foundation, and an active member of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. So welcome to all of you, and thanks for taking your time to be part of today's conversation. So as Maria mentioned, we really welcome you to submit your questions and comments so that we're able to integrate those into the conversation today. But we'll get started, obviously, with a few prepared ones. And the format we're going to use is the first question is going to go to everyone. Paula, we're going to start with you. And then I'll be asking some specific questions to each of our panelists. We'll invite panelists, if you want to chime in, absolutely do that. But to cover a little bit more ground, rather than asking every panelist every question, we're going to do some targeted questions. And then hopefully have lots of time to come to the questions or comments of things that you're most interested in talking about. So please do put those in the chat window. So to kick, well, it's been 4 months since most of us last spoke. We had the optimism of a new year transition into the long Canadian winter, and now we're into this period of hopefulness that is spring. So for you, what's happening with your organization that has shifted since our last conversation? So Paula, I think we'll kick off with you and invite you to respond.
Okay, well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you everyone in Charity Village and all those who are joining. Let me begin by acknowledging that the land on which I live and work is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and it is with a mixture of anguish and hope that I express my gratitude to have the opportunity to be present in the territory. And I am committed to understanding how I can contribute to both truth and reconciliation by addressing our past with an open mind and open heart to build a better future together. And with that, I want to say, I mean, the hope that we all have with the spring and the general trends that we are seeing. As many of you know, many elder volunteers had to step away from volunteering, and others who have compromised situations, or perhaps there was concern because the organizations and the programs that they were volunteering with were closed and postponed. And what was really hopeful was that in our survey in the fall, the majority of people who had stepped away from volunteering said they did intend to return when it was safe to do so. One of the concerns, of course, was how do we make sure that those who had to step away weren't isolated and feeling more vulnerable when they used to be active participants. So I know that one of the questions, Bruce, you had asked me to address was the issue of vaccinations and the focus right now. Many volunteers have stepped up to help in vaccination clinics, which is awesome. One of the challenges is that many of them are not eligible for the vaccinations themselves. And so there's been some discussion about how do we make sure that when volunteers are engaged in providing essential services, that they are also seen as essential in the provision of that. The flip side to that is that in an organization that is engaging volunteers with vulnerable people, can you make it mandatory that only those who have been vaccinated can participate, in light of the fact that it is really up to each individual to make that decision? So those are some of the interesting ethical issues that we're seeing, and I'll leave it at that for the moment. More to come.
Sounds good. So we'll go Paul, Sandra, and then our newest panelist, Mary. So again, this question about what's changed, what are you seeing in your organizations?
So, you know, we continue a lot of these different trends. We talked last year, Bruce, about the prevalence of will preparation across Canada, something CAGP really keeps an eye on and communicates with, and we listen to our colleagues in estate planning. So actually perfect timing today. National papers, Globe, Post, everything, full page from the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners talking about continued aggressive will preparation in Canada by Canadians. Exciting to see in that full page. Anybody can go check it out today. Mention of philanthropy, charitable giving, charitable bequests. You know, we got some report back in that data from just one platform who recently shared with us that they did as many wills in March, April of last year as they had done in the past 10 years. And although our willpower data that we've done with Environics showed us that on average Canadians leave gifts and wills at about 5%, this one platform had charitable bequests at over 20%. So, you know, people continue to do this will preparation. This is exactly why we're launching Willpower at this time, a national $40 billion 10-year bequest campaign to keep that discussion going. But that continues. And of course, since now and then, happy to share, many have heard, Canada Helps closed at almost $500 million last year. And although many organizations are still struggling, Canadians responded and they gave.
Great, Sandra.
I think for us, we keep seeing the lines being blurred between the for-profit and nonprofit sector. And what I mean by that is that we expect to see this continue in 2021, where consumers and employees alike are demanding that businesses add more purpose to their profit-centric model. And then on the other hand, nonprofit organizations looking to kind of scale up and grow the way for-profit businesses are doing that. We know the landscape is competitive. We also know that people are giving more than ever, and that trend will continue. And I think it'll be those nonprofits that can adapt to the new way of doing things, because we're all going to get vaccinated eventually, and you know, things will sort of go back to normal, but it'll never be the same, right? The digitization of giving is here to stay. The way we meet on Zoom and the different platforms and teams we use, that is here to stay. And I think the continued push for equity, diversity, and inclusion across all sectors, not just ours, and more of this kind of partnership, right? I think the next generation of philanthropists are highly intelligent, not as trusting perhaps as the baby boomers were, right? They want to give close to the cause. They want to make sure that we're truly authentic, right? That they're having an impact, that they're part of a winning team, and that is actually affecting change. And I think that's a trend that we continue to see, the scrutiny that we as a sector are under.
That's great, thank you. And Mary, your first time on the panel, sort of opening thoughts.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. I think if we go back in time, when the pandemic hit in 2020, we saw a large drop in job postings on Charity Village. And that, of course, was indicating what was obvious, that many organizations had been forced to lay off staff and had stopped hiring. And as the year progressed, we also saw more interest in our virtual e-learning courses, which suggested that nonprofits were using the time to retrain, to do professional development, or maybe get new skills that they may have needed as their duties had changed with the layoffs happening and then taking on new work during the year. When the shutdowns happened across the country, more people were working remotely and organizations were having to shift their fundraising events to virtual ones instead of galas and other in-person events. So at Charity Village, we actually saw this as a perfect time to invest in virtual tools and platforms to help the sector. So things like our new crowdfunding platform, we launched a video interviewing service, more e-learning courses that focused on virtual operations. So we've been really busy transforming ourselves to help the sector survive as we emerge from this pandemic. Within the pandemic itself, we've seen high interest in compensation data and the impact that COVID has had on compensation levels. We saw strong interest in content that we produced related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as staff well-being and mental health. And so these are topics that remain top of mind and of high importance to individuals and organizations. And then at the beginning of 2021, with both job postings and volunteer postings, we saw a return to pre-COVID levels, with the start of 2021 being quite strong. So that was really indicating what has been discussed earlier by my panelists on here today, that organizations are feeling more confident and are starting to hire again.
That sets the table nicely, and it's interesting already to hear a pattern emerging in many of the comments, which is around sort of real fundamental change that has been taking place across the sector. And certainly at Imagine Canada, we're hearing much the same thing, where there's been a change of DNA. And so it's not just about waiting so we can go back to doing business the way we did before, but there's actually new paths forward. I've been in many cases referring to them as the silver lining and linings in the pandemic cloud, because for many organizations, they're seeing real upsides and benefits. So we're going to go to some individual questions now. Paula, we'll start with you. And you touched on this in your opening comments around the state of volunteering and re-engaging volunteers. So here we're now in a time where, depending on what part of the country you are living in, we're back into stay-at-home orders, lockdowns, sort of restrictions of movement and organizations and the services that they provide. But it also has an impact on corporate employee volunteerism. And so what are you kind of seeing as it relates to these types of re-engagement of volunteers, or is it really being stymied at this point?
It's interesting, the patterns we've seen. So of course, everyone thought by now, surely we'd be opening up and there would be no more lockdowns and we'd be all active again. And it looks like we need to be patient and navigate that for a bit longer. But some of the things that we're seeing that's interesting, over the winter, when those that had employee volunteering programs where they weren't promoting in-person volunteering, and even with virtual volunteering, although it's really been amazing to see mentoring and tutoring and even friendly visiting being done in virtual formats, still there's a limit to that. And so many have turned to learning opportunities, similar to what Mary was saying. But when you look at the spectrum of engagement, so from being informed about an issue to better supporting a cause and active participation and leadership, that learning about a social justice issue or food insecurity or some of the things that are really important to you, about which you will later volunteer, is something that many are doing in workplaces. So organizing learning events and opportunities to deepen that understanding of what's going on in their community and who's working on that. In terms of virtual, I think we've heard that prior to COVID, maybe 8% of nonprofit organizations had virtual volunteer opportunities. It went up to 58%, and 51% say they're going to continue, not only virtual, but they're still going to continue offering virtual services as part of what they offer going into the future. So lots of interesting changes, some things that'll stay and some things that will hopefully re-engage people in that one-to-one that people are missing.
That's great. And one of the conversations I'm even hearing and talking to executive directors is that their boards have never had higher attendance, in part because they're not having to show up physically, but when they're now, in fact, meeting more frequently to make sure that things are going well, that some of their volunteers have never been as engaged. And I think they're looking forward to the day when they can, celebrate that and do the work in person. But this idea of still having a digital component where possible is something that organizations are really looking at. So Mary, we're going to come to you next, and Charity Village kind of has this unique lens on the sector, in terms of the job postings and kind of being that kind of go-to place where people think about their next engagements. You've talked a little bit about job listings and compensation. I'm also curious to see if you're seeing anything as it relates to, in a sense, sort of senior succession planning. One of the observations that I've certainly had, I won't broaden it other than myself at this point, is that as we're seeing many announcements for executive directors or CEOs and vacancies coming, it's not because many of these CEOs are moving on to new roles. It's because they're moving into retirement. And I'm curious as to whether there's any perspectives that you have in terms of, are you seeing demands for training? Are you seeing demands for, mentoring programs, or the age-old question of succession planning? And also, how are organizations more interested in compensation issues as they seek to replace senior leaders who are moving into retirement? So I know that's a big bucket of things, but I wonder if there's any that kind of strike you that you could chat a little bit about.
Yes, absolutely. So from compensation, we actually produce, as you're probably aware, a nonprofit salary and benefits report. And we've just released our report for 2021. And what we've seen is that salaries have remained fairly consistent with the last year. But of course, that's only for part of the sector. We've lost a lot of jobs within the sector, and as you've mentioned, not just to layoffs, but also people retiring or deciding that this is a good time to move on or change their life. So I think the other thing that we're noting is that there's real serious impact on burnout. And we have a new COVID Pulse survey that went out and looking at the HR impacts that COVID caused. And the report's going to be released in the next couple of weeks, but it shows some really important data that I think organizations need to keep in mind. 33% of the organizations that participated reported that they laid off at least one staff member since March 2020, with 23% engaged in permanent layoffs. 31% of the organizations who laid off staff also reduced hours for some or all of their staff. But there weren't all bad news either. 62% reported that they don't expect any further layoffs, while 23% actually reported that they added to their staffing over the past year, and 42% actually experienced no change. So I think the big problem comes with staff morale and burnout. We know that 42% reported that they see staff morale continuing to deteriorate so far this year. I mean, everyone is suffering, and we know that there's serious burnout in the sector. So it's clear that workplace wellness, culture, psychological health, and safety in the workplace are important areas that leaders need to pay attention to. In terms of the number of job volumes, as I mentioned, actually, we really hit a trough in April and May of 2020, but then we began to slowly increase from June to November to reach in December and the first 3 months of 2021, pre-COVID levels of job postings. So that to us was quite interesting and very positive. On the one hand, while some of them are likely due to reserve budgets from 2020, but it also indicates that organizations are feeling more confident about their future, and it may well be reflecting what you've noticed, Bruce, in the need to rehire perhaps even younger up-and-coming talent for taking those leadership roles within the organizations, as we saw people retiring in the leadership areas.
Those are some great facts and figures. And one that I might just, or I guess one and a half that I just sort of add into is, even from some of our own polling, has been the importance of some of the federal programs to help keep staff employed in our sector. So our most recent sector monitor data showed that 50% of organizations who indicated that they had paid staff were applying for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program, and that was supporting almost 55% of their staff. So while employment numbers have held strong, it's one of the reasons that Imagine Canada and others are advocating so strongly for the federal budget coming up on April 19th, for the continuation of some of those broad programs, because the wage subsidy alone up until the end of December had invested somewhere between $2.1 and $2.5 billion in registered charities alone. And so it's been an important instrument, and hopefully it'll continue so that those numbers that you cited that were actually holding reasonably strong can continue to do so. So Sandra, over to you on this. So, and you touched on this a little bit in your opening remarks around, we're going to kind of turn our attention the next couple of questions to fundraising. So, when we're talking to organizations, we're hearing about this shift to digital giving, and I think Paul's data around, what we're seeing with Canada Helps is extraordinary. But we're kind of noticing that there's sort of two camps. There's those who are adapting existing fund development tactics to online platforms, really as a placeholder, planning to return to in-person. And then there's those who are leveraging this dramatic disruption to change the way they engage donors, really moving sort of fully digital. So what are you seeing out there? Do you think there's a particular or clear trend emerging in this area, or others that you're witnessing?
Digital is here to stay. I think anyone that does major gift fundraising, which is traditionally very personal, knows how hard it is to track down some of those major gift donors, right? They're often traveling, they're not in the country full time. It has never been easier sometimes than to get a Zoom meeting with a major gift donor, right? So I think even in that aspect, the very conservative way of fundraising, that is here to stay, right? I'm not saying that it's all 100% digital all the time, but the technology is here to stay. It's making things a lot more efficient. We've had less cancellations of meetings and less things, even if they're canceled, they're rescheduled usually for the next day or later on in the day. I think people have gotten comfortable asking for millions of dollars over video calls. It's always nicer to meet people in person. I fully agree with that, but I think that piece is here to stay. I think it'll be a hybrid. And I think that organizations that do not focus on the digitization of giving are going to be left behind. We have to get on board on it. Even the next generation, we need to get ready for Gen Z. They're the oldest members of that generation are turning 25 this year. They will be the largest consumer generation over the next 5 years. They're all digital, right? So as we prime at the next generation of philanthropists, it'll be video trends, it'll be online fundraising, it'll be optimizing our social media, it'll be SMS texting, it'll be the gamification of giving. I don't think we can ever go back again. I think there'll be a hybrid, right, to accommodate the boomers and the other generations. But technology has brought us a lot of efficiencies, right? And I think that is here to stay in terms of the way we fundraise. Same with virtual events. I think even once we're all vaccinated, I think most people are not really jumping on the idea of going to mass conventions and conferences where there's thousands of us packed in these big halls. I think we're probably looking forward to smaller gatherings, a couple of hundreds, but I think even in those cases, it'll be a hybrid, right? There'll always be a virtual aspect to so many of the events that we'll be having in the future as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's going to be interesting times. We're going to explore events a little bit in a few minutes. So Paul, you talked about in your opening remarks some of the momentum around planned gifts and wills and some of the data that you're seeing that suggests that this is exponentially greater than it's been. I wonder if the sense of mortality for many donors has been front and center and they're kind of actively or consciously thinking about it. But maybe one of the things I might invite you to think a little bit about or reflect on is, I think traditionally in fundraising, organizations don't think they can have planned gift conversations unless they've established a long tail relationship with donors. They've moved them up the donor pyramid. Do you think that the pandemic has changed that thinking? How might organizations who haven't had a pattern or history of engaging in planned gifts or will-based donations enter this space if they've not had the long-term relationships with donors? Or is it still, you got to do the fundamentals before you can do this?
Wonderfully enough, Bruce, that strategy was already out of date before the pandemic hit. We know at CAGP that a lot of the planned giving, in fact, we don't even call it planned giving anymore, because in 2021, every major gift is a planned gift. Who's dropping a duffel bag of cash on your front desk before, right? So we've got to be thinking ahead. Our motto at CAGP is build back blended. Who doesn't have blended revenue streams? McDonald's doesn't just sell Big Macs. Their highest profit item is coffee. Our challenge is that we've known that we've got to get into this space. And what the pandemic has shown us, again, I encourage my colleagues to read those business papers, stay in touch with the economy. I joked on our last webinar that there was a shortage on not just lumber, but Botox. This time around, what is Canada's shortage? Puppies. The money is there, and Veronics, a lot of our colleagues have shown us the savings have risen. Donors are ready to give. They've got the assets. Canada is already a country where more people hold wealth in assets, not cash. And as much as transactional event-based fundraising is a need for acquisition and engagement, the fact is that gift planning, gifts of assets, stocks, stocks is a huge rally at the end of the year in December on this. We've got to be ready. We've also got to look forward. Again, a lot of people know me as the book guy. 2021 book published by colleagues of ours, Canadians talking about cryptocurrency and donations. I was just talking with a founder yesterday of a platform called Goodzilla, which is essentially Kijiji for charities, which actually distributes funds through Canada Helps. But, you know, as spring cleaning starts, it's technology to support Canadians to clean and give. We got to meet Canadians where they are. And more people live through those phones. Well, we got to reach them through that kind of technology too. But, you know, assets is a big part of it. We're excited. Next week, our conference, CEGP, we've got almost 500 people joining us because so many charities, large and small, realize they got to diversify their revenue, and we hope to help.
That's great. So essentially what you're suggesting is that my fundraising tactic of seeking duffel bags full of cash is not one that I should bet the farm on, correct?
No, it's and you might disappear and all the things that come with it.
Yeah, no, great thoughts. We're going to go to a question that's come in from one of the people who's tuned in today. So I'm just going to throw it open and see who's interested in diving in. And again, I do encourage more of those to come in so we can open up the conversation. So this first one is, I'm wondering about burnout within the sector and how this might have an impact on succession moving forward. Are there experienced leaders who will need a break before they'll feel available to move on to future positions? And I think this issue has surfaced in the conversation already, but anybody want to sort of jump in on that one?
Sure, I can. I think this issue of burnout is going to be a very serious issue for the sector. So, you know, with so many more demands on services for many nonprofits and the challenges of wearing many hats because of layoffs in the sector, I think the burnout aspect is troubling. So it means that not only are leaders leaving, but their own staff are thinning out, and maybe people leaving the sector for good. So I think we really need to focus on providing better services through our HR plans to create succession plannings so that we're able to look at an ongoing health of an organization and maybe sharing now as things turn around with new digital fundraising and as our economy opens up, we can share more job sharing and sort of get more people employed and back into the sector and working within their organization to be able to relieve some of that stress that people have been feeling as they've been doing more with a lot less resources.
Yeah, any other panels? Yeah, Paula.
I wanted to raise the issue of burnout among board members, particularly those chairing boards. I know that many of them have felt an enormous pressure and burden because of an organization that they're leading and care so much about, and yet they have perhaps school-aged kids at home that they are you know, helping to learn virtually, and they have elderly parents in different cities that they're worried about, etc. And so I think that we need to acknowledge that the leadership on our boards is also feeling stressed and stretched and burnt out, and that relationship between board and staff to support one another has never been more critical from what I've seen.
Yeah, Paul.
And Bruce, if I could turn it back to you, you know, one of the challenges is, and we're really excited to participate with the Association of Fundraising Professionals research this year, their foundation's What Canadian Donors Want. But here's an important thing that Imagine Canada's put out there, and we stand with you on. We can't fundraise our way out of this. You know, we have to say to the government, if our organizations cannot support ourselves, the burnout's going to get worse. As they say on the plane in the before times, we were all big travelers. You got to put the mask on yourself before you put it on the ones you love. And our organizations cannot continue that core capital without that support for the sector. So we're grateful to you and the other organizations outside of fundraising talking about core capital, talking about the needs of the sector, because as Paul has shared, those board members are burning out, not just because the charities don't have the needs. The needs are through the roof, and actually donations and requests and collaboration. I'm tracking 5,000 campaigns through crowdfunding, great things that people are doing, and they want to collaborate with nonprofits and charities. Our people can't keep up. So that's where we need to keep the pressure on the government and governments at all levels to support the sector as much as all the other parts of the Canadian economy, of which we are an important engine.
You bet. Sandra.
Just to quickly add to that, it's also a sector that's heavily female-led, that employs a lot of women. And we know that we are often the ones that hold multiple hats, even in our own family dynamics, right? Whether we're mothers or single mothers and working moms and volunteers. And we're also often the first ones that are to be laid off, right? Or that do not receive equal pay for equal work, right? So I think it's just a really important piece that our government kind of looks and helps support our sector, because it's really important to women in this country, right?
Yeah, great points from everyone. I'll just maybe also offer one thought, that I think this also has to be a place of intentionality, because if you look at the vast majority of organizations in our sector, they don't have paid professionals in the area of talent development and human resources. And so we continue to do the work to support the people in our communities, but we're not supporting the people that are supporting the people. And so I think organizations need to make a little bit of space as they try and meet this increased demand with fewer resources to ensure that their own staff are being looked after. So we're going to go to one more question that's come in from the audience, and then Paula, I'm going to come to you, but this one I'm going to direct to Paul and Sandra. And it's, do you think there's still a place for direct mail in this shift to digital, even as a means to drive online engagement? So I'm not sure who wants to take that first.
Yes and no, right? I think direct mail via email, sure. It's kind of funny that someone mentioned that, because I just received a direct mail piece returned to me from 3 years ago. So this individual hung on to that letter for 3 years, which I really appreciate. So I think for certain demographics, yes. But I think we've also seen that people, because of the global pandemic, are more hesitant in terms of bacteria and germs in their mail. I know a lot of people that leave their packages and their mail outside on purpose for a number of days. And I think it's so ingrained in us now that it will be hard to unlearn some of those behaviors. So yes, I think mass marketing is here. However, I think it'll be online, right? It'll be via email, it'll be via social media, and less the traditional like letter, handwritten added note to it. Yeah.
I would just add really quickly that, you know, people often, I used to use my office as my mailing address, and now I'm not in my office anymore. And many people have moved to, you know, suburban areas, or have gone to different places to actually continue to work from home. So some of that in-person mail, unless it's redirected, may not be going to that same donor or getting reached by that donor. So I think the digital world is the pandemic has put us in this place where people are working and engaging with the world from a whole variety of different physical places now. And so it's really hard to say whether that that actual piece of physical direct mail is still going to be really effective. I really do think we're moving to a digital kind of communication strategy.
Yeah, Paul.
I would add, though, again, you know, we've got great data in, again, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, What Canadians Want, Penelope Burke's research on reaching donors. We've predicted the death of direct mail forever, right? And the fact is, nobody has one revenue stream. Nobody has one donor demographic. We've got to meet our donors where they are. So, you know, when it comes to gift planning, again, very often those older donors are looking for that kind of contact. But I'll tell you, the one that's actually become the real big one in the pandemic, everybody thought it was going to be Zoom and video. It's the phone. Major gifts and donor contact through the phone. We're going back to the fundamentals of fundraising. So that's a reminder to us to say we're a relationship-based business. Spend your time building relationships, and you know, get that training through Charity Village, through AFP, through CAGP. We've never seen more people doing that, and our colleagues at CFRE as well have reported a huge area in going back to the basics of training to engage donors at all levels: acquisition, transactional, major gift, and contact. And again, for us in the world of bequests and assets, it's with advisors. You know, we have launched just now 2 years ago the first ever Canadian designation in philanthropy, the MFAP, Master Financial Advisor in Philanthropy. We are now going on a couple of hundred advisors with that, and you know, they're serving clients. So they want to go online and they want to find how to donate stocks to you, how to put you in the will, how to transfer assets. God willing, we got some great things in the federal budget. We will need to be ready for that. So don't count out, you know, this other new demographic that we've got to engage with. And for a lot of them, digital phone, but it's still that face-to-face. And phone is a big part of that.
That's great. So now we got more questions coming in. So I'm going to be all over the Jeopardy game board now in terms of questions. But Paul, I do want to ask just one question because I'm sure some folks out there are thinking a little bit about it. Last week, the federal government responded to the 2019 Senate study on the charitable sector. And I was going to use the metaphor, putting on your advisory committee for the charitable sector hat, and you have a hat on. So this works out beautifully in the sense that as a member of that group, what are your sort of initial reactions to the government's response to the Senate report, in particular, the sections on volunteering?
So I'll speak to how Volunteer Canada is feeling about that. And I know that the advisory committee will certainly be discussing it. I think overall, it was really great to see the support and recognition of the role of volunteers in Canadian society, and the recognition that a voluntary action strategy would be a good thing. When we look at Australia, Ireland, and Nigeria, who have all released their national voluntary action strategies, where governments, businesses, and the nonprofit sectors have worked together. I'm really inspired by that and looking forward to working with folks on that. When we think about a strategy that would have a layer of inclusion, look at informal volunteering, virtual volunteering, youth engagement, there's a lot of things that have come up and that were really amplified during the pandemic that we need to pay attention into the future. So I think that we've been in touch with Employment and Social Development Canada, and we're co-hosting an event in a few weeks for National Volunteer Week that will hear about Nigeria and the process they went through and how we can look at the Canadian context and see what's right for us.
That's great. Thanks, Paula. And I do encourage people to take a look at that governmental response. We'll be certainly studying it carefully in relation to also what we see in the upcoming federal budget and whether some of those thoughts they indicated moving forward on are acted on that. So Mary, I'm going to come to you next with a question. We were going to talk about digital transformation, and someone's picked up on it in the chat box. So we'll come to you first on this question. How do you think our sector understands, the speed of change that we might need to adapt to and to become more nimble and responsive to newer opportunities? Have you seen during the pandemic organizations moving at speeds that they haven't in the past?
I don't think there's any question in anybody's mind, and certainly we saw that reflected by the sector, that the pandemic really accelerated the pace of transformation, and particularly to try and emerge with a more understanding of a virtual way of operating and working. And I don't think there's any turning back. So, from our perspective, we saw that now was really the need for digital transformation, and it was critical to be able to provide some tools and some new services that would support the sector. And so we've seen huge take up in the new e-learning courses that we brought out that have focused on things that help remote work, virtual volunteering. We've really seen an uptick in the interest of that. So I think the understanding of the relevance of this transformation, understanding the need to be able to transform everything that they do, from fundraising to working with their staff to recruiting volunteers and to recruiting with boards, has had to adapt at an incredible pace to adapt to work remotely and virtually. So, I think there's an awareness, but I don't think it's an awareness that we've seen them move fast enough. So that's why we were so keen on making sure that we were investing in tools that could help the sector respond and to grow that digital literacy and understanding how they can operate more effectively with virtual tools. So again, we launched our new video pre-screening and interviewing platform. We're about to launch an automated reference and background checking services. We also launched a crowdfunding platform. We're seeing an uptick of that. We saw organizations that we supported actually being able to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars using that platform. And so we're expecting to see that continue in the new years. and in the years and months ahead. These new services and tools were really designed to help make nonprofits more resilient as we all navigate to a more virtual world, both getting through the pandemic, but also in the way that we need to change to be able to be effective and to be successful in the future.
Great, Paul.
If I can just add too, that we've also just been through and are going through the holiest seasons for a lot of our charities in the faith community of tithing, atonement, zakat. We just celebrated Passover and Easter. We're about to enter into the holy season of Ramadan. And for a lot of those faith-based organizations, this is a huge catch-up for them to stream their services, to update their digital infrastructure, and yes, to make that concept of tithe and support for their donors in that digital space. So it's been great to see those organizations that were often the furthest behind look to catch up.
Yeah, I'll just offer one thought on this. I've also, in conversations with organizations, witnessed what I would call a surge in courage. Organizations who said, it is going to take us 2 years to do this, they did it in 5 weeks. And the ideas of risk and reward, maybe driven by survival, said, we're just going to do it. But what we're witnessing now is organizations who say they're exercising a new muscle around agility, nimbleness, and flexibility, and it might be something that then gets worked on again and again in the future. So I think it's a hopeful time for real interesting and rapid innovation in our sector. So I'm going to go to another question from the audience, and I'll just throw it open to whoever. It's kind of an interesting one as it relates to who donors are giving to. I'm wondering if donors have changed what and who they are investing in. COVID-19 has had a disproportionate impact on women, Indigenous communities, etc. Are donor funds starting to flow in these communities that have been traditionally under-supported by philanthropy? So just curious if folks have a take on that. So I saw Paul the hand go first, so you're in, and then Sandra.
Well, we're just excited to get some more data on this, right? For those who have seen the report from the Canadian Foundation for Black Communities at how much was not granted to these communities through our colleagues in the charity report about Indigenous philanthropy and in collaboration with the Circle, we know where it's going. But we've also got new data from the Donor Advised Fund community in the Strategic Insight report to show that, in fact, Donor Advised Public Foundation granting went up. So from financial institutions granting at a rate of 21%, from community foundations granting at a rate of 14%, and in fact 70% of these public foundations increased their granting, and over 50% gave to organizations, primarily new and BIPOC communities that they've never given to before. So we're starting to slowly see the needle turn as we look at the data.
And Sandra.
I agree. Like, the data is still out there, like we're still waiting on it, but we all know that our colleagues in the food security space have had record-breaking years. Traditionally, they have had more challenging times, right? I don't think they've ever done this well like they did last year. Whereas I think the arts and such that have traditionally done quite well are probably having a little bit more of a challenging time. I think also seeing all these funds pop up in terms of supporting Black entrepreneurs and the Black North Initiative and anti-Asian racism and anti-Indigenous racism, I think it is really a shift, in a cultural shift for all of us Canadians, that we know we have a problem and we need to address it. And I think this is the time where many of us are really focusing on that. And I think when the data finally is available, we'll probably see trends that many of those organizations will probably have record fundraising years. I'm not saying it's probably close to where it should be, but in terms of their own historical fundraising, I think many of them will do quite well.
And I'd like to actually pick up on this theme that's been introduced in here, because I think, and we did talk about this back in December, but I think this seismic shift as it relates to anti-racism, anti-oppression, diversity, equity, and inclusion, sometimes expressed as justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, is definitely a change that is going to be permanent in our sector and is continuing to happen. So I'm going to throw this actually open to any of you. In thinking about the future of the sector, sort of what advice would you give to leaders of organizations who have maybe been watching this but haven't actively engaged at this point?
Happy to jump in. The step one was showing up. I think a lot of organizations in 2021 recognized where they were and were ready to show up. Again, was just speaking with the Circle on Indigenous Philanthropy, talking about their declaration of action. It's time to move beyond declaration. We need people to join the Circle in their work of reconciliation in philanthropy. It's also a scary time. We're about to next week at our conference have some tough conversations as our colleagues at Philanthropic Foundations Canada, a number of other colleagues. You want to unpack the supremacy in philanthropy and major giving and colonization of all of that. This is like trying to change the engine of a car from gas to electric while it's barreling down the highway. It's going to be hard to unpack these things and do it. But I think the key is in 2021, we got to go from showing up to showing that action to partnering. So if you're not following Canada's Foundation for Black Communities, Black North Initiative, and the Circle on Indigenous Philanthropy, they're the ones a lot of us are partnering and following and listening and learning to say, what do we got to do now, and let's act.
Yeah, Sandra.
I agree 100% with Paul. Like, gone are the times where you can just say, I'm not racist, or, of course, we're all anti-racism. It is now time to act. And I think there's so many great organizations out there that are really holding all of us accountable, right? There's certain measures put in place to anyone, for example, that signed the Black North Initiative, certain goals that they need to meet. And it also kind of exposed others, right? For example, many of the legal organizations are unable to meet those goals and ask for an extension, right? Because they just do not have enough Black lawyers in the pipeline, right? To even hire out of law school. So I think it's been really positive, but it's also a time when many people feel vulnerable and maybe unsure. And I think it's okay to have those feelings, and it's really now the time to become an ally and an accomplice, right, in these causes.
Paula or Mary, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think when I fully agree with what Paul and Sandra have said, and I think that it starts with like an honest assessment of where you're at and being willing to put ego aside and really delve into it. One of the things that we're looking at is what role does volunteering play in building inclusion in organizations and communities? And when you think about at our essence as humans, we have a need for a sense of belonging. And the flip side to our need for a sense of belonging is people offering a sense of belonging, and all of us doing that together. And so while volunteering, when we look at those who are volunteering and look at those serving on boards, we don't have a group that it does not reflect the communities that we work with and serve. And I think we need to really figure out how we do that. We're looking at creating some learning materials that will, working with Canada Life, that will promote an understanding of the role of volunteering in building inclusion.
And just to add, as you know, Charity Village through Village Vibes and a lot of our content does have lots of materials and resources available to support the increase and the embracing of organizations for diversity and inclusion. We're actually going to be publishing an e-course in the months to come that can sort of give organizations the tips they need and the kind of strategies that they need to do a better job of making their own organization more diverse, as well as thinking about how they would recruit in the future to not just for their board, but also for their own staff. So we know from our the response of the sector to our content, how important this is. We know it's really important to young people as well. So if the sector wants to continue to grow and thrive in the future, we need to be much more responsive about that and come up with strategies that we can do that. And we follow, in terms of the nature of what we require from employers, we follow the law in effect, but we do recommend to employers to actually include the range of their the remuneration within their job postings. And what that does is it provides a transparency to the job seeker to know that if they're from an underrepresented organized group, they're not going to be offered a much lower salary to somebody who is is not an underrepresented group. So I think we try to encourage the sector to think about when they're recruiting, having that as part of their strategy and how they design their job postings.
And hey, Sandra and the AFP team, bravo to you. Call heard across the country that your job board is going to show the salary this year, this spring. This is the kind of progress that we need to see. And great thanks to Radna Omnabar, the senator, as well, for doing that study on diversity on boards and working with all of our organizations here today, all of us, to help us drive. But it was great to see StatsCan as part of that. We need the powers that be at the table.
Yeah, and I think Senator Omnabar has been a relentless champion to ensure that that kind of work got done. And well, I'm hopeful if we're able to do this conversation again in the future, we'll be starting to talk about some of the emergent best practices that we're witnessing. So, you know, we've been talking about the awareness last time, the imperative this time, and hopefully next time we'll be able to start showcasing organizations who have really embarked on this journey in a fulsome way. So we're starting to get close towards the end. So I just want to give you a heads up because I'm changing the last question on the fly. And I want to give you a second to think about it before we get there, but there's one more we're going to do before we get there. So the last question I'm going to invite you to think about is, what gives you hope for the future? As you think about the work that you do, the organization you're with, the people that you engage with in the sector, and those who benefit from the services of organizations from our sector, what gives you hope for the future? But before we get there, another question that's come in from the audience relates to, Sandra, I think it was a point you made around making it sort of easier to reach major gift donors because we've all gone digital. Some of them are, you know, they're not out of the country for 6 months, they're not constantly on planes, and talking about sort of this hybrid model. But there's a question around, have any donors shown that they're not very comfortable with technology? Maybe give them apprehension to giving because they're not able to meet in person. So we've talked about the upsides, but have we actually heard of any downsides of not being able to meet in person?
I think for sure, right? It was such a steep learning curve, right? I was joking with my own mother. I'm like, this is the first time she had to order something of Amazon, right? Like, their hands were forced in many cases, right? And I think for sure we'll have donors who are just not comfortable and who don't prefer it. And I think that goes back to Paul's point, the telephone, right? That is such a key piece, especially for the baby boomer generation. Like, they grew up using the phone, they love the phone, they're also less likely to text, right? So I think, yes, to that comment, I think it'll be a hybrid, but we also have so many savvy baby boomers who have really gotten on board with technology, especially as we had to physically distance and they haven't been able to see their grandkids, right? I think a lot of them are really comfortable now using Zoom and the many other platforms that are out there in terms of connecting with their own family. So I think it will continue like that to also be connecting with the favorite causes that they care about, right? Or their favorite volunteer organizations. So I think, yes, perhaps for some, but I think we'd be doing a disservice to think that just because the older generation might not be as comfortable with technology, I think that's no longer true, right? It might have taken them a little bit longer, right, to kind of get on board, but I think 2020 has really encouraged everyone to become more technologically savvy. That includes myself. So
that's great, thanks. And unfortunately, we're not going to have time to get to all the questions that have come in, but I think we're going to head into the final round now just to make sure that we end this on time. So I just want to go back to that question. So what gives you hope for the future as you think about your organizations, the people they serve, your colleagues in the sector? So who wants to kick off on this? Okay, I'm going to just pick one. Mary, we're going to start with you. As our newest panelist, we're going to put you on the spot to start off with.
Okay. Well, actually, the increase in job postings that we've seen makes me very helpful, or hopeful rather, to that seeing that organizations are rebounding. The other thing that I'm really impressed by is, in fact, the incredible way that organizations have actually embarked on this digital transformation. And that gives me hope because I think it also allows for a greater connectedness to a new demographic of donors and volunteers and employees employees that of young people who are really are digitally native and also like the new methods of fundraising, so they can see the impact that they're making almost immediately. So I'm actually quite hopeful because of the nature and the speed at which the sector had responded to this challenge and has been so resilient in continuing to provide its services to the people that need them and for their mandates, but also that it showed the determination, resilience, and the capacity to relearn and transform their own organizations and the way that they work. So to me, that's a sign of great optimism and strength.
Thank you. Paula.
I think what gives me hope is the fact that, you know, we call it informal volunteering, but people doing great things outside of organizations, whether it's crowdsourcing or helping out informally neighbors and friends. And I know that's a threat to organized communities that are traditionally used to people donating and volunteering in roles, you know, applying and so on. But I think the challenge for us in organizations is to embrace that, see how we could leverage the generosity that's clearly pouring out all over the place, with youth having the highest rate of both informal volunteering and formal volunteering. That gives me hope. And I think there's a way for us to embrace it, celebrate it, and connect it to the good work that we're all doing.
Thanks, Paula. Paul.
You know, you said a bit of a magic word there before, Bruce, which was courage. And one of the challenges is we've seen a lot of things as threats over the past decade, the rise of crowdfunding and all these other things. It's time for us to have the courage to turn obstacles into opportunities. And the way we do that is also to be able to admit where we've been wrong, where we've been off track, where we've been addicted to acquisition and special events and easy money and transactional fundraising. It's time to go deeper into that. Again, all of Paul's problems, the solutions live in a book. So this is the one that's tearing up my life right now. Think Again by Adam Grant, which is helping us to say, all right, how can we admit we were wrong? Think again, rebuild together. Again, it's not just about charity. We've got to restart those special events, not just for our own revenue, but for the economy. Small charity special events in small rural communities are tied to small business and economies, and we've got to restart together. So when I see that courage, that's what gives me great hope.
Thank you. And Sandra, last word to you.
For me, it's my colleagues, it's our donors, it's pretty much us as people, the vaccine. Those are all the things that kind of give me hope. I think we've gone through a really hard time last year, but I think out of that hardship comes something beautiful, right? It has really made us examine who we are as human beings, how we truly look after each other, how much we miss people that we didn't think we were going to miss, right? So I think the humanity of all of this at the end of it gives me hope. And I think since we're all in that nonprofit sector space, we tend to gravitate towards that anyways. That's why we're in these jobs. And that's why we do what we do. And I think that is what gives me hope.
Thank you so much. I think it was a nice way to end, because in a sense, our sectors are keepers of the flame. We keep these hopes bright for our communities, so they have places to turn in times of need. So thanks to all of you for taking your time today to be panelists. Thanks to everyone who took the time to chime in. Thanks to Charity Village for hosting this. And I wish you all the best for the rest of your day and for a hopeful spring to come. Have a great rest of the day. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much, Bruce. We really appreciate you facilitating the panel today, and I want to give our sincerest thanks to all of the panelists for returning today and sharing your perspectives. To all of our attendees, I just want to remind you quickly that you'll receive a follow-up email later today with a link to the video recording. Please feel free to share that link with your colleagues, and the emails will also include a survey link that you can fill out with your feedback on today's webinar. On behalf of Charity Village, thank you again for joining. We have a lot of webinars planned for you between now and summer, including our next session on April 22nd, which will cover how proactive risk management can help you build a sustainable nonprofit. And included in that session will be a discussion of getting back to business after COVID-19. So we'll include a link to register for that webinar in an email that you received today, and I hope that you'll join us for that. So thank you again for taking part in today's discussion. Like Bruce, I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye.